Hey, welcome back to Acer P Bonsai. I'm Pat. I'm here with my Acer palmatum Sagan. The Sagan Japanese maple is a beautiful cultivar, highly prized for bonsai. This specimen was imported from Japan. It's known for its beautiful bright pink foliage in the spring, not as pale as Benichi Dori, not as fire engine red as Shinda Shoujo, but a really lovely color right in between the two. And then in addition, having those nice, long, delicate leaves with a fairly small size. It's perfect for bonsai culture. But today's video is not about this tree. I want you to take special note of this sinuous, curving trunk line. Some might say that's contrived or it looks too man-made, but for me, I think this is a staple form in classic Japanese maple bonsai. So although I have some more realistic, naturalistic trees, I also enjoy these really sinuous, curvy ones. Of particular note, a tree stood out to me that I saw on Instagram. I may butcher the name, so I apologize, but Suisho-en has this really beautiful Japanese maple in their garden. It's like a rising dragon coming up out of the clouds, and I have been observing it for a few years now, and I wanted to make one of my own. Not only do I want to make a really beautiful form, I want to try to do it for free. With no further ado, let's jump in. I'm going to show you from start to finish how you can build a beautiful, snake-like, sinuous, dragon Japanese maple for free. The first step is finding free material. We're already at the beginning of June here in Virginia, and so we're well into summer. But if you're elsewhere in other more cold climates, you might now just be entering mid to late spring. So I wanted to release this video when everyone who's watching it has the availability to find Japanese maple seedlings. Let's get our Sagan put away and go find a seedling. On the way over, let's take a look at the garden benches. Here's one of my air layers from a previous video. And as you can see, I'm grafting it over with this Benichi Dori underneath. Up here, you can see the cut putty where the Benichi Dori shoots are coming up through the thread grafts. There's also one down here, and they're all doing really well. This year, we're growing a ton of different perennial herbs and flowers because we're continuing to build our landscape. And then here's one of my bonsai benches. Along the bottom, I've got some youngsters. These turquoise pots here, those are Arakawa seedlings that I've collected. I've got about 10 of them scattered across. Over here, we've got our Shinda Shoujo root over Afghanite. This over here, this is a really nice little Kotohime cutting that I got from Shannon Salyer. That's an awesome little tree, excited to grow that. There's my Shishigashira. I've got a little forest of trident maple seedlings there. That's a whole mess of different cuttings in that little pot back there. There's one of my Benichi Doris. And I've got another seedling maple here, but I'm grafting some of that Benichi Dori stock onto the trunk line. Here's one of my Bloodgood seedlings that I'm growing over a nice big piece of amethyst. You guys might recognize my Kiyohime there. That's the big one that we just repotted and did the major root work on in a previous episode. There we've got the big Shinda Shoujo triple trunk in development. We just put that Sagan back on the shelf. One of our earlier episodes, we have our Oridono Nishiki Japanese maple forest here. The mother stock is this largest tree. That was a nursery stock. I took several air layers off it and planted them all around. Those are doing nice. Quite a few more of those Oridono Nishikis down here in this brown pot. So those may make their way into this turquoise now Tokatake pot with the rest of the Oridono Nishikis. There's another Shinda Shoujo over here. It's got a really nice curvy trunk line to it. And then over here on the end, this is our other Kiyohime. It was a massive air layer that I took off of a fairly decent sized nursery stock. It's got quite a nice base and it is settled in nicely to the wooden box. Right, before we find our seedling, we are definitely going to need a tool. If you have one of these bonsai root hooks or even just an ice pick or a screwdriver, those will work great for unearthing our seedling. I already know where I'm headed. I've got a seedling over here. Here's our Kinran here. And there are a couple really nice Kinran seedlings down here. After I collect the seeds, I usually replant them right back into the pots of my big mother trees. But over here, we've got a volunteer seedling. Boom, and there she is. This is just a plain wild green Japanese maple that came up in the yard. So I'm gonna collect that. With our pick, we're gonna get down in here and we're gonna loosen the soil. We don't wanna damage any of those fine roots. And we're going to gently lift up this little seedling. Just like that. Can you guys see that okay? There's a nice little root ball there. All right, here's our little seedling. There's been jets flying over all morning, so I may have to do a little bit of editing. In light of that, I'm going to take my little seedling and plop it down into a little glass of water. We want to make sure that those roots stay nice and well hydrated. If you're doing this at home without any major delays, you can just spray them down with the bottle every few minutes to make sure they stay moist while you're preparing your container. So we have here a small terracotta pot, and I have a liner down in the bottom to make sure none of the soil falls through. I've got used pre-bonsai soil, so this is a mix of organics. We've got perlite in there. I think there might even be a little bit of pumice. We've got some expanded shale, a little bit of pine bark. It's all cheap used soil. If you don't have this, you can use regular potting soil. You can even get some soil out of your garden for free. So at this stage of development, it's not really that important what kind of soil you use. Come on in close and take a look as we prepare the pot. Take some of this used bonsai soil and put that down inside of here. Looks like there's a few hornbeam seeds in there, so we might have a few of those come up as well. All right, so we got the pot about half full. Let's comb out the roots of our seedling, and you can see there's one primary root here that's kind of becoming a taproot. We're going to go ahead and snip that. It's a pretty big reduction of roots, but we still have quite a few nice feeder roots here. Even at this young age, we want to give it the chance to start ramifying the roots. Any of these remaining roots, if we can, we're going to spread them in a radial pattern, but we're not going to get too wild with it. We're just making sure that they're not all right on top of each other. A few more handfuls of our pre-bonsai soil mix. All right, let's water this little tree in. We want to make sure we allow it to run through, and then we'll water it again. All right, so that's all we had to do for the early spring collection of Japanese maple seedling. Let's go ahead and flash forward to late summer, early autumn. Your little Japanese maple seedling should look something like this. We've had it in this little terracotta pot. We've fertilized it with whatever fertilizer you have on hand. You can use organics, you can use a pelletized or chemical fertilizer, whatever works for your budget. And if you don't want to spend any money on fertilizer at all, you're still trying to go for that free tree, then you can just let it grow naturally. It may grow a little bit slower. You can accomplish the same task over the course of a few growing seasons. The tree has now grown enough where we can wire it. I want to make sure we capture all the fine detail work, so let's move inside to the studio. All right, we're back inside the studio after one full growing season on our Acer palmatum seedling. As you can see, it's reached a height of, I don't know, I'd say about 18 to 20 inches. That's pretty good for one growing season. It's probably hitting the upper limit of when we can still get some good movement wired into the tree. We want to set that movement early when the tree is young. At this stage, if we get a few minor scars, they'll still have time to heal as we continue to develop our tree. So come on in close and take a look at how we wire up this little whip so that we can set it in motion into becoming a beautiful dragon-style Japanese maple bonsai. I've prepared a few pieces of silicone wrapped aluminum wire. This one here is about a 1.5 millimeter, and this is a 2 millimeter wire. And then those are wrapped in silicone so that they are less likely to damage the trunk of our tree. If you're still trying to go the free route, you can get wire from all over the place. When I was first starting out bonsai, I even remember stripping some old electrical wiring from the house to get copper wire. I didn't even really know what annealing was, and I wired up trees with that super hard copper wire. Take a look at what you have on hand. You can even get movement using zip ties. Some people will bend trees over and then use a zip tie to hold that bend in place by just wrapping the zip tie around the curve. So think of something creative, follow along with us, and use whatever materials you have on hand to create the movement in your young tree. The important part is that we get that movement set while the tree is still young enough and flexible enough that we can bend it into these extreme shapes without damaging or breaking the trunk. So we're going to start out down close to the base of this tree with this 2 millimeter silicone wrapped aluminum wire. In order to get the wire set firmly, first I like to shove it down into the soil. So I'm going to shove it all the way down until I feel it hit the corner of the pot. And that's going to give us a little bit of stability while we're wiring. This wire should be enough to bend this tree, but if it's not, then we can always add another wire. Once we've got it in place, we're going to gently wrap it around the trunk. And as you can see, I'm changing position of my hands as I go. I want to make sure I'm holding that wire in place. I'm moving the wire around the tree, not the tree around the wire. Another tip that I've picked up, if you look over here on this side, you may notice that I've left a small air gap between the wire and the tree. We've wrapped our wire with silicone to make it a little softer, but it never hurts to leave a little bit of growing room in between the wire and the tree. So let's continue as we go. controlling the movement with our hands, and wrap this wire up and around the tree. All right, here we go. See how I'm switching hands? I want to make sure that we're in control of the wire and we're not allowing that wire to excessively rub up against the tree. We're going to follow that right on up. You can see we're starting to run out of wire here. These young leaves are likely to be our first side branches. If you accidentally damage one, that's okay. There's going to be plenty more where those came from. If the wire gets too hard to bend at the end, don't be afraid to grab a pair of pliers to help you. All right, that's looking pretty good. We're going to grab our second piece of wire. I'm going to bend a little bit of a hook into it to get us started. I'm going to start a little further down the tree so that I can have these two wires overlap. Optimally, you'd have a perfect length wire to go the full length of the whip. It's pretty common though to run out of wire and have to grab another piece. If you're going for that fully free mode, you may need to use the wire that you have. You may not be able to pick and choose. All right, this wire is starting to take hold, and let's get it wrapped up the rest of the way around here. We're still taking care. We're controlling our wire, and we're leaving a little bit of a gap to make sure that we're not excessively rubbing on the tree. All right, as we continue to wrap up the length of this trunk line, you can see we've got a major branch split here. And if you take a close look, the one on the right-hand side is slightly thicker and is heading straight up. This is our primary leader. This one is slightly subordinate. It's growing a little bit thinner, and it doesn't have quite as much vigor. It's actually stopped growing at the end. This other shoot is continuing to grow. So we're going to continue wrapping our wire up the primary trunk line of the tree, and that's going to be over here to the right-hand side. Now, I think at this point you've realized that I'm playing a little bit of camera trickery. This is a different tree, and we're still in June here in Virginia. But I wanted to be able to show you all these steps. So this is still the action you're going to want to take later this autumn with your young seedling. All right, so we've already established our trunk hierarchy by continuing our 2mm wire up the main leader of the tree. We're going to come in now with a second piece of wire. This is that 1.5mm silicone wrapped aluminum. Again, you can use whatever wire you have on hand, but as you get toward the top of the tree, you'll probably notice the branches are not quite as thick, they're a little more flexible, and you can use a lighter wire. Since we have a longer leader and a shorter branch, I'm going to bend this in an L shape to approximate the relative length of each of these branch lines. Then we're going to take this wire and we're going to put it right up against the crotch of where these two branches come together. You'll also notice that I fit it neatly between the coil of this first wire. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hold that firmly with my right hand, and then I'm going to wrap this longer wire in the same coil direction as that wire that's already in place. We're going to make sure this wire nests nicely with the first wire. And look, while I was worried about snaking my wire around, I forgot to leave an air gap. We do want to be careful, especially with these thinner wires. These thinner wires are a little bit more flexible and less likely to scar the branch when you're applying the wire. They're also kind of sharper in a way. Think of a cheese cutter. That wire in a cheese cutter is not actually sharp, but it does have a really thin surface area, and so it's more likely to be able to push through something and cause a cut. That's what we're thinking about when we're looking at wire. So we're going to make sure that we leave an air gap, even with this thinner, lighter, more delicate wire. So let's go ahead and coil that around both sides. I got it started there on the top, and now I'm going to secure it onto the side branch as well. Now up here at the top, I've got two leaders, and I've noticed that this stronger leader actually has no branching for a really long time. It's almost a 2-inch internode. The leaves have broken off, but from there to there is one node. This weaker branch here has slightly tighter nodes, and I think it's going to be a more usable tip. Now, we may end up cutting both of these off in the future, but for now, I'm going to continue this wire along the leader that I see has a little bit of potential. Let's continue wiring this side branch, controlling that wire as we go, and making sure we leave a slight air gap. As we come to the finish line on the initial wiring, let's talk about the purpose of these branches. So we're going to create that dragon style maple, and we're going to need a long sinuous trunk line to create the basic shape of the tree. This side branch is not as important when it comes to the structure of the tree. We're going to cut this off later. However, whenever I'm wiring a tree like this in the pre-bonsai stage, I like to wire all of the major branches because I may end up using them. And if you're at home on a budget, you may end up air layering this branch off in the future. As we grow at this trunk line, this branch, since it's here at such a young stage, is going to eventually be too thick to ever be part of the final design. But we want to make use of this material. We want to get some interesting movement. We want it to look cool while we're growing out the tree, even if we cut it off later. All right, now comes the stressful part of this operation. We've got to get these nice sinuous bends into this tree without snapping it. So let's just get in there and make some bold, brave bends. So the first bend I want to make is going to be right here. And even though we left an air gap, I'm going to use this back curve of this wire, and that's going to be the spine that supports the bend. So I'm thinking about bending the tree with the very sharpest part of the bend leaned up against that bend in the wire. All right, that's looking pretty good. I'm bending slowly, adding just a little bit more torque each time. Can you guys see that? We've got a nice curve there, and we want to bend that over even farther. We don't want to just keep bending a super sharp curve right there. We're going to move up a little bit further and add a little bit more bend into the branch, and we want to make sure that those bends fall in a position where that apex of the bend leans right up against the wire for support. So right here, this is going to be my next bend point, and I'm going to bend this forwards. I want you to take a look at what I did. This first bend moves perfectly perpendicular to the screen, and then it curves back to the right-hand side. This second bend is continuing to that curve in the downward direction, but the angle has changed. So let's move this so that you can see. Now that I've got the branch perpendicular to the screen, this first bend you can see is coming slightly towards you and maybe slightly over here to the left. We don't just want to change angle, we also want to change the direction of these curves so they look a little bit more natural. We know we're going for this dragon style, which can be a little bit contrived, and it definitely looks man-made, but we still want it to look kind of abnormal or unpredictable. That'll make for a more interesting design. Now I want to do a section that's still curving, but maybe a little more gently. So not only are we changing direction, we're changing angle, we're also changing intensity of our curves. That's a third factor to make a more interesting trunk line. There we go. So you can see we've got a section there that's just kind of curving back around. And now what I'd like to do is introduce another sharp bend. One thing I didn't mention before, while I'm curving up, I'm often slightly twisting in the same direction as the wire curls around the trunk. What that's going to do is create a little bit of twisting in the fibers of the tree, and that's going to make it less likely to snap. Think about a rope. When you look closely at a rope, all the little fibers are twisting, they're not straight. That helps create strength. All right, that's looking good. I think I can give it a little bit more. Ooh, that's dangerous. Okay, you guys can see we got a nice sharp curve right there. With this doubled over wire, we've got extra support for this, and I think we can handle a little bit more bending. Let's bring that over forward. That looks nice. This little side branch is headed off to your left. So now I'd like to bend this trunk away from that branch and give it a little room. So let's see if we can do that. There we go. Create a little bit of space. I think it's time that we bring this tree back up a little bit. Let's pause there and review. So we've got a sharp curve there, we've got a second sharp curve, then we have a nice slightly curving straightish section, and then we go into some more intense curves over here now that we've created a little bit of space. Let's bend that just a little bit more. All right, that's looking nice and sharp. So then we came up and we curved back over here to the left, And then we're doing a nice sharp curve away again. We're creating some really nice, interesting movement here. So we've got these changes in direction, length, angle, and we're up here, we're almost to this branch. I think we can get a little bit more movement in this final section here before we hit the split. So let's see if we can bend that back on itself slightly. Great, that's gonna be perfect. All right, so remember, this is our main trunk line here. This is our secondary supporting leader. So now that we're here, let's see what we're gonna do. I think we've kind of come this direction, then we came forward. We still have angles, but let's snake it off that direction there. Let's see if we can get some bend right there. That looks nice. All right, and I want to keep it as confusing as possible. I want these bends to be interesting. There we go, that looks nice. All right, now I think we need to come up. There we go, that looks awesome. We're sitting right above the base of the tree, so at this point we're still fairly well balanced. Let's bring this leader forward, get a bend there. The initial movement of the tree was pushing all that energy off to the right-hand side, and then we're kind of slowly snaking around. I think what I'd like to do is to push that strength back over to the left-hand side to create a little bit of tension in the design. So as I said, this slightly weaker leader, the very apex, has more potential with those shorter internodes. So we're going to bend that back up. We want to bring this branch down to a more lateral orientation so it doesn't outpace our primary apex. Bend that slightly forward. All right, there we go. And we have the supporting branch. We want to keep this branch, but we need to move it out of the way of the rest of the tree. We don't want it interfering with the growth of anything else on our trunk line. So in that same fashion, we're going to put a little bit of interesting movement in it. It's imperative that we get this branch down and out of the way. And then when we get down here to the very tip, point it into an upward direction. And that will encourage it to grow. We could wire this, but for now I'm just going to leave it and let that run. We can probably wire this in early summer next year after it's grown again and added a little bit of strength. All right, so that brings us to the completion of our work for this first year on our little seedling. As you can see, we've got some really unique shape. This is going to be quite an interesting little tree. And I'm feeling brave. I'd like to try to bend this just a tiny bit more. There we go, great. I think that's looking good. And all right, I'm gonna stop there. I don't want to accidentally break this tree. As some of you may have already guessed, this was not actually that same seedling, and we haven't advanced through the year. This is a different seedling that I had on hand. This little guy actually was from last spring, and I grew it out with some of its siblings. It grew a little bit slow, so it's actually fairly close to the size you can expect your little seedling to grow. And if you're unsure and you want to make sure you have plenty to choose from, you can always collect several of those little baby seedlings. You can even plant them all in one pot. You could just plant like 5 or 6 in a little pot like this, or you can get a bigger tray and you can collect a few dozen of them. You're also going to have a little bit of variation. This little tree came from underneath my Ryusen Japanese maple, so more than likely it's going to have normal green Japanese maple traits. This little green maple here I collected underneath a really large Japanese maple, standard green, up near William and Mary, up there in Williamsburg. And so I've got a lot of these little ones. If you live a little bit further north, there's a pretty good chance that you probably have more access to Bloodgood seedlings. Bloodgoods are those really beautiful red Japanese maples that you'll see often in landscapes in front of houses. Early spring to June, you can find their seedlings growing all over the place in people's yards. So if you have one in your own yard or you have a friendly neighbor, stop on by and see if you can collect a few of their seedlings out of the ground. Those will also make really beautiful Japanese maple bonsai. I'm growing that one Bloodgood seedling over the piece of amethyst, and I think those beautiful red-purple leaves are going to match really well with the purple gemstone. So there's a variety of different maples out there. If you've got some around your neighborhood, get out there, beat the streets, and start finding and collecting those seedlings. And then later this year, you can set it up with some nice movement. So at this point, we're going to jump forward one more time. So we're going to leave this wire on the tree all of the rest of autumn. The leaves are going to fall. We'll leave the wire on through winter. We're going to protect this tree from any frost. We don't want it to suffer in the cold. Japanese maples are generally hardy to zone 5 or 6 in the wintertime, but in a small container, you should probably subtract about 2 hardiness zones. So if you live in zone 5, a tiny Japanese maple in this little terracotta pot will probably experience the stress as if it were in zone 3. So you're going to need to provide some additional winter protection. Even if you're in a warmer climate like me in Virginia, it never hurts to throw this into an unheated garage or an unheated greenhouse through the winter. That's going to reduce the stress and make sure we don't lose any of the branches. Remember, I told you to wire this tree in early autumn, not late autumn. We don't want to wait until we're approaching winter. We want it to have plenty of time to stabilize before frost starts hitting you regularly. All of these little bends have the possibility of creating little micro tears in the bark of the tree through the cambium and generally weakening the trunk and branches. Allowing it that extra time through autumn before the first hard frost will allow the tree to heal any of those minor wounds. I want you to put on your thinking caps and come along with me. We've got to imagine what the next year of this tree is going to be. So we're going to follow this tree through autumn. The leaves are going to change color, and then fall. We're going to protect this tree over the winter through those heavy frosts and hard freezes. And then in the spring, it's going to grow again. Wherever there's a leaf on this tree right now, imagine it's going to grow a new branch. So that's going to continue to expand. The leader is going to grow nice and tall, and we'll have probably doubled the thickness of this trunk. And that leads us to our next demo tree. So here is the next progression of that tree. There's also some little seedlings in the pot. So the tree in this large pot, I wired it just like this tree here last year. And then this spring, after it grew, I allowed the branches to extend, and then I cut them all back. And you can see that they've started to extend a little bit more. All right, so come on in close. Let's take a little bit better look at this tree. All right, so let's get down in here. It's actually quite sturdy. You can see the girth of the tree is maybe a little bit over 1 centimeter at this point. And down in here, you can see this gray line where the wire was wrapped. I took this wire off last spring after it had gone through its first winter, and it had a little bit of scarring there. But as this has grown through the season, it's expanded out and it started to heal over. I'm fairly confident that these wire scars will be fully healed over in another year or 2. As you can see, we've got this nice movement. Comes off here to this side, here to the left. It snakes back around and bends forward and then continues up. There's a pretty bad spot of wire scar right there as well, but not too bad. And I got some nice sharp movements here. You can see here there's a really nice sized scar. This is one of those lateral branches that grew several nodes long. I chopped this off in the spring and it grew some smaller branches this year. And then there it is, it curves around. You can see I continued that nice movement. And then up here, there was another chop that I made right there. And then one of the side branches I continued up there. And I chopped it again right there. And there we are. So we've developed some really nice movement. This is a much smaller version of that Suishoen tree, but I think we can create something beautiful here. All right, so here we are with our 3 stages of our seedlings. We started out with a young seedling here, and even in the large pot, you can see I've got a bunch of seedlings planted down around the perimeter. So those are going to be future bonsai as well. Here we have phase 2. So this is what we can expect our tree to look like later this autumn after we wire it. And then a whole year later, this is our tree in mid-June after 2 full years of growth. Imagine I collected this tree roughly May of 2 years ago, so maybe it's about 25 months old. And we've already started to develop a really amazing trunk line. This is one of my primary fundamentals that I like to apply in my Japanese maple bonsai. You see, a lot of these trees that I see in production these days have these massive scars, or they're just really chunky and they have straight branch pieces. It is critical that you get these really sharp bends into your tree when the branches are young and fresh and supple. If you do that, you can create some really magical looking trunk lines. Now, what's great about this technique, because I have all this wild movement going up through the entire tree, if I decide later that I want to make a more compact tree, I could always air layer it down here. Let's say I just wanted to use this first part of the tree. I apply an air layer here, and now the upper part of my tree still makes a really great twisty second bonsai tree. So by continuing to apply that movement to all of your branches, even like I said in this little side branch here, if I don't want to cut this off and I only have a few trees on hand, I'm looking to increase the stock of trees I have in my collection, I could air layer this off. Maybe I'd keep it for a whole nother year so it thickens up, and then I could air layer it off. In the meantime, it served its purpose of growing, creating another second bonsai trunk line, and thickening the lower part of the trunk below the branch. So that is the technique I'd like to finally share with you. As you grow your pre-bonsai stock, create that interesting movement, whatever looks great to you, and think about how many trees you can create in the future. I'm really looking forward to seeing this progress. So I would like to continue moving forward with this beginner series on developing Japanese maple dragon style bonsai with all three of these trees, and I'll continue to apply these techniques so that we can look at how they progress with a separation of 2 years between the three trees. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like and subscribe. I really appreciate the viewership. I appreciate all your comments, and I try to get back to you as soon as I can. If you have any questions about your trees, hop into the DMs over on Instagram. I'd love to chat and share my insights. Thank you so much for joining me on this adventure that we call bonsai, and I hope you have a really great summer.